Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Sanchez, here to welcome our viewers from all over the world, including those of you who are watching us right now on the portable TV app. Tonight, tensions are simmering between the United States and China after what amounts to a war of words between a high-ranking U.S. Air Force official and an equally high-ranking Chinese official. Let me take you through this somewhat. So U.S. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, United States Air Force Secretary, says recently that the United States should be concerned about China's military modernization, which makes sense. But then he went on to suggest that the best way to deal with the Chinese is to simply scare them. Scare China, his exact words. Well, that did not go over very well because upon hearing that, China's deputy Air Force commander fired back his own missive. Commander Wang Wei threatened the Air Force Secretary and presumably U.S. fighters with this, quote, idea of that they should meet in the sky. So here's the quote. Let me give it to you in context. So he says, recently, a counterpart of mine, referring to the U.S. Secretary, who is from a major country, claims that he wants to scare China. I can only say, if they are not scared, let us meet in the sky. And then Wei goes on to say that Chinese forces are ready to ensure national security and defend their nation's integrity. The statement, reeking with bravado, right, amounts to a bring it on message. But here's the question, really. Did the Chinese commander volunteer this threat? Or is it part of a new messaging, if you will, a new strategy from Beijing to be more aggressive, perhaps, toward the United States? This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where we look at these tendencies, these stories, these back and forths, because we truly believe it's time to do news again. So here's our list of the questions that we think you'll be asking tomorrow after watching this newscast tonight. Here is China altering its message to sound more aggressive toward the United States? Is the U.S. government about to be shut down, and what's it mean for the economy? And then why is the big red spot on Jupiter suddenly getting so much bigger? What gives, right? All right, here's how we begin. Is the Chinese government assuming a more aggressive tone? Of late, China officials, who in the past would have shrugged off when confronted with accusations by the West, are being, I guess most would describe as more aggressive themselves. So is it a new messaging of some sort, new strategy, or just a spur-of-the-moment response that we happen to catch in the moment? Here's NRS correspondent Farron Franzak with more on what sounds like a threat from a Chinese commander.
Its big debut was highly anticipated, and it did not disappoint. The most advanced stealth fighter jet fitted with homegrown engines at the nation's biggest air show. You might think this is the latest U.S. Air Force fighter jet, but you're wrong. It's China's.
Seeking to contain China is doomed to be futile and a failure.
China-U.S. relations are at a new low between an ongoing trade war, technology, human rights, Hong Kong, the origins of the coronavirus, and now a rift between the two countries' Air Force commanders.
I'm an engineer, among other things.
U.S. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall was sworn in back in August, where his first task was to immediately put together the Air Force's 2023 budget. Kendall telling the media, quote, "The budget should field the kinds of leaps-ahead technologies that scare China." Chinese Air Force Commander Wang Wei quickly responding, telling reporters, quote, "The U.S. can meet the People's Liberation Army in the sky." Wang Wei also referring to Secretary Kendall as a counterpart of mine who is from a major country.
We are in a national, strategic, long-term contest with a formidable adversary. And what you do every day is important to that struggle.
Kendall says the Air Force has been overly constrained and it's not been allowed to do things that are at a higher priority. One of those high priorities, getting Congress to allow the Air Force to retire older aircraft.
If you look at the metrics for our performance of our systems and the adversaries, what they're building to try to defeat us, it's pretty clear to me, and has been for some time, that we need to invest in some advanced systems that are going to sustain our capability to defeat our adversaries.
Kendall says he's been obsessed with China for quite some time, in particular, its military modernization and what it means for the United States.
As we all know, due to the continuous provocation and containment of China by the United States, the relationship between the Chinese and the U.S. military has faced considerable difficulties and challenges.
Both defense officials from China and the U.S. have held 2 days of talks showing a very small sign of progress. However, that small sign pales in comparison to the work still needed to fix the broken relationship.
China has been generous and tolerant and true to our word. While the U.S. has serious problems in its self-awareness, its perception of China and today's world.
China adding it's that view by the U.S. of China that is the root cause and the difficulties between the two countries and the two militaries. For the news with Rick Sanchez, I'm Farron Franzak.
Let's bring in Saurabh Gupta. He's an Asian politics and policy expert, decades of experience. He joins us now live. What do you make of this? It almost sounds like the Chinese are being more aggressive, or were they brought to the table that way by the comments by Secretary Kendall?
You know, as you said, I think it's more to do with bravado. It's just that Secretary Kendall said these things, so they needed a rejoinder. It just so happens that they had their air show at this point of time and unveiled some of these assets. But yes, Chinese military modernization, including its Air Force, has been making rapid strides. And we saw at this Air Force at this show that they have really been able to start using domestic engines, an area hitherto where they were not that advanced, and can set aside the imported engines that they had. And I think all these things are feeding into this dynamic at this point of time.
What came first, the chicken or the egg? Is China just deciding all on its own that's going to be remilitarizing and modernizing? Or are they being forced to the table by the United States wanting to modernize and remilitarize, as we heard Mr. Kendall suggest in that report by Farron Franzak?
I would say it is the Chinese moving forward, simply because, I mean, the state of their military is just not that advanced. They focus more on the economy first. Economy is humming. Economy is almost $15 trillion. That's the size of the Chinese economy. And they feel, I mean, they need to have the military assets commensurate with that sort of an economy. Remember, the United States is $21 trillion national economic size. China is at 15. Yet the gap between the two is larger than that, the military gap. And they now feel it's important that they need to narrow that gap. And this is a process that has been happening, I would submit, for the last 10 years, perhaps.
So when Mr. Kendall said in that report that we just heard that it was really important for the United States to try and keep up with China, is he saying that because, like every other engineer, he just wants to have more work and wants to buy more stuff? Or is it because it really is true that China's about to pass us up militarily?
No, China is not about to pass the U.S. up militarily. It's narrowing the gap, but you are correct. An engineer wants more work, and that's exactly the basis of why he's saying these things. I have seen the U.S. conveniently lose enough war games to make the case. I mean, they do war gaming with their allies, and they let out the message that on this so-and-so war game, we actually didn't do that well, and particularly that is, the purpose of that is, hey, we need more resources, and we need more resources, and that is correct up to a point. But I think that there's a little bit of salesmanship happening out here.
Well, in the end, and we're down to the last question, but what is the strike point between the United States and China? If you had to pinpoint one thing that you think is most troubling, what is it for you? And you follow this every day.
I'd say Taiwan, Taiwan, Taiwan. China's military modernization with regard to a Taiwan Strait crisis is really coming to a point where the U.S. will have to think very hard. That's why we saw the nuclear submarine issues with AUKUS. That's why we're talking the U.S. would prefer that Japan host intermediate range missiles and that it gets engaged in the Taiwan scenario. All these things, and the Chinese themselves, they started doing battle group circumnavigation of the entire island, going all the way around it with their battle groups and all. This is stirring fears, and at the end of the day, there is no direct defense obligation, a legal defense obligation to Taiwan. But if Taiwan falls military, the United States' credibility and its forward deployed posture in the Asia Pacific will suffer grievous harm.
So if you want to see what's going on between these two countries, just look at one thing: Taiwan, Taiwan, Taiwan.